What is happening, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'll show you how to build a Crud app using NextJS 13, Tailwind, and PocketBase. You'll learn about all the latest features in NextJS 13, for example, client components, server components, data fetching, and caching your API responses. As you can already tell, we have a lot to cover, so without wasting any more time, let's get into it. Now, before we start building the project, let me show you what we'll be building today. It's a CRUD based to-do list that is powered by PocketBase. Now, this is what the app looks like. If I refresh, you'll see the task stays there because every task that we add is getting stored in the DB. Now, let me go ahead and add another task. So I'll click here, I'll give it a name of test, and then I'll add description as test description, and I'll select which category this tag belongs to. So for me, I'll select work and hit create. Now, as soon as I hit create, you'll see this newly created task is showing up on the home screen that belongs to work category. And in the sidebar, we'll show all the categories that these tasks belong to. So for example, if I add another task that belongs to work category, you'll see this number is now incremented because we have two tasks that belong to work category. Now you can also navigate to the individual categories. So for example, if I click on shopping, you'll see tasks that belong to only shopping. I can also click on work to see the tasks that belong to work category. Let me go back to home page. Another functionality that I have added is you can click on this checkbox to mark a task as done. And once the task is done, let me refresh. You'll see this line showing up that is basically to tell the user that this task is done. Now, once the task is done, you can simply go ahead and delete the task because it's done and it will be gone from the home page. Now you can also edit the tasks. So let me go ahead and click edit. Instead of test, I'll select personal, hit update, and this is how you can edit a task. Let me also show you PocketBase a little bit. This is what the PocketBase dashboard looks like. It is powered by MySQL Lite, where PocketBase stores all the data. Now I won't be showing you how PocketBase works or dig deeper into it. I'll show you how to set it up and create collections. This tutorial is mainly focused on NextJS 13, but if you guys want me to make tutorial on PocketBase, I can do that. Let me know in the comments below. Now that you know what we will be building today, let's go ahead and start setting up the project. So first things first, in order to start building this project, we'll need to set up our front end and our back end. So we'll start with the front end first. I'll go ahead and create a folder called to-do list. You can also create that folder anywhere you like. So I'll do mkdir and then I'll check into that folder. Now in here, we will set up our front end app. Let's do npx create next app at latest and pass experimental app as a flag. Hit enter. Let's name our app. You can name it anything, but I'll name it as front end because we'll have another folder called backend where we'll put all our PocketBase code. Once this finishes downloading NextJS, let's do ls. Now as you can see, we have a front end folder. Let me cd into front end. And this is where all our NextJS code is. And if I go back into backend folder, this folder is just empty. So we'll set up our backend later. Now the next thing that we want to do is we will cd into front end and we want to start setting up our Tailwind CSS. So first thing I'll do is I'll open this whole to-do list folder in our code base. So I use Visual Studio Code, but you can use whichever code editor that you like. So I have opened to-do list in my code editor, VS Code. Let's see our front end app. Okay, great. The next thing that we want to do is we want to set up Tailwind in our front end. Now here we'll do npm install Tailwind CSS post CSS auto prefixer. These are some of the dependencies for Tailwind. So let's hit enter. Once that is done, we will initialize Tailwind using npx. Let me clear the console first. npx Tailwind CSS init-p. Now if you see, we got two new files, tailwind.config.js and postcss.config.js. So we'll open up tailwind.config.js. Now here you can basically specify what folders and what files do you want Tailwind to follow and to purge those files. So in our case, what I'll do is for now in content, I'll put, because we are using the latest version of NextJS, we'll do app slash anything slash any file name that has the following extension, either JS or JSX. I have GitHub Copilot enabled, that's why you're seeing these suggestions in my editor. And then I'll just copy this, paste it below on line 5 and replace app with components, because we'll create another folder called components where we'll be adding all our components. And for components, we'll directly, there won't be any folder, so let's get rid of that. Okay, great. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to add Tailwind directives in our global CSS file. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll create a new folder called styles. Okay, let's create a file here called global.css. Add these, and in our app, what we will do is we'll delete all these files except page.js and layout.js. So let's go ahead and do that. I basically want to start from like clean slate, so I'll just get rid of everything. Let's go to layout. Now in the layout, we want to import our global.css that we just created with Tailwind directives. Now let's try running our front-end app using npm run dev. Okay, so we are getting an error saying import cannot resolve. Let's see what's going on. So we have it as global.css, not globals. So let's refresh. Okay, so this is where the app is running. As you can see, we have a clean slate. This is where we'll start building our app. Let's verify that Tailwind is working as expected. So I'll add h1 tag and give it a class of. Okay, yeah, so it is working as expected. As you can see, the styles are getting applied. So that's pretty much for our front end setup. Now let's go ahead and quickly download PocketBase and set up our backend, and we can start building the app. Okay, now in order to install PocketBase, all we have to do is go to pocketbase.io. Under documentation, we'll go ahead and download one of these files. Depending on your OS, whichever you're on, you can download that file. So I am on Mac, so I'll go ahead and download that. Now you'll get this zip file. You might get error from Chrome sometimes. I'll go ahead and extract files from this zip file. Now what you want to do is, once you extract all the files from that zip file, you want to copy and paste all those files in the backend folder. Once you have done that, let's go back to our code editor. I'll split the terminal so I can run my front end and my backend at the same time. So I'll cd into backend and I'll run PocketBase using, let me expand this, and I'll run it using this command /pocketbase serve. Now sometimes if you're on Mac, you might get this error because the developer PocketBase cannot be opened because the developer cannot be verified. You can overcome this by going to settings and then enabling it. I'll show you how. Let's go to system preferences, say allow anyway, and then let's go back to and now let's try running the app. Okay, so now our PocketBase dashboard is running at this localhost URL and port. So I'll open this in the Chrome. Now when you open PocketBase for the first time, this is what you'll be seeing. So just enter your email and password. This is to log in into PocketBase dashboard. Okay, so this is what the PocketBase dashboard looks like. I won't go into the details of what PocketBase is and how it works behind the scenes, but if you guys want me to create another tutorial on PocketBase, let me know in the comments below. So what we want to do here in PocketBase is just create a new collection called notes. We'll add some fields to that collection. The first one is title, then we'll add description, then we'll add boolean whether a task is done or not, and then the last field is select. We'll give it a name of tags, and then we can add bunch of tags: home, personal, school, shopping for now, and we'll allow multi-select. Now before you hit create, you can click API rules and we'll enable API calls for everyone. So just click on these. Now our API is open to everybody, so we'll hit create now. Once this is created, let's refresh. Let's add one record. You can leave this ID as empty. PocketBase will automatically generate ID for you. Test description, and let's select tags and hit create. Now we have added one node. Let's try to access the API in the browser. Okay, now as you can see, using this API endpoint, I can fetch all the nodes that I've added. Great. Now that's pretty much it for our backend setup. Now we'll solely focus on the front end. I could have also done this without using PocketBase, but I actually wanted to show you guys how like server components work, and this is necessary for that. Now let's go ahead and start building our front end UI. Okay, now so let's start creating our UI now. First component that we want to create is the header component. So in our front end folder, I'll create a new folder called components. This is where all our components will go, and inside the component I will create a file called header.js. Okay, great. Now I'll import React. Let's call our header. Let me first go ahead and turn off GitHub Copilot. What we'll do is we'll return header, and then now we want to add one link that will go back to the home page, and then we want to add a button to add a new task. So let's do h1, and inside h1 now I want to import a link component from NextJS. Okay, so once you have imported the link component, that should just say to do, and it should go to home page. Okay, great. And then outside h1, let's add another link, and the href for that link should be add. Just leave it as plus icon. Okay, now let's import the header component in our layout. Now I want this header component to be available on all the pages, so that's where the layout.js file inside app comes in. So think of this layout.js as a wrapper component. Any component that you put in here will be available on all your pages. This is the root layout.js. And I've noticed one thing, that it's very important beginning Next.js 13, it's very important to plan your app ahead. Think about all the components, which components should be available on all pages. Because I ran into few issues where I wanted sidebar to have certain functionality, but because it was added in layout.js, I was not able to do so. So make sure before you start building Next.js 13 apps, think through your app's architecture. So let's import header from components, and inside the body we forgot to export header component. That's why we are running into this error. Okay, great. So now we are getting our to do and plus icon. Now let's style our header a little bit. So what I'll do is I'll add few Tailwind CSS classes to this header tag. So the first is flex and justify between. This will push our to do h1 and our link plus add icon to extreme ends. Let's add some padding as well, py-5. Let's add some background color. Let's add some horizontal padding as well. Great, awesome. Now let's go ahead and style our h1. Okay, awesome. Okay, great. Now our header is done. So now the next thing that we want to do is we want to build the sidebar first. So let's go ahead and create a new component called sidebar.js. Now in sidebar, what we want to do is we want to fetch all the nodes that we have from PocketBase server and show that in the sidebar. So let's go ahead and do that. And this is where the server components will come in handy, because this sidebar does not have any functionality. It does not change the state. It does not need the state. That's why we, instead of client component, we'll use it as a server component. And if you pay attention, by default, all the components in app directory are server components. I'll show you how to make a component a client component soon. So what we want to do first is we want to turn this component into a async component. Now you can think of it as a React component if you want, but this is more sort of a function now. So what we'll do is we'll create another function called get data, and then we'll get a const called data and await fetch. Let's go ahead and copy the API URL. Okay, great. Now later down the line we'll have to think about the caching as well, because by default Next.js will cache all the API calls. So we'll come back to this later when we get to that part. And I'll simply just, now I'll create a const called response and await and then return response. Great. Now inside the sidebar, what we want to do is, now before we move forward, let's import sidebar component first and show it on our page. So now sidebar component, we do not want to show it inside layout sidebar.js, and you'll come to know for the reasons sooner. Let's import sidebar into our page.js and layout.js. One of the reasons why I don't want to show sidebar in layout.js is I do not want to show sidebar on all the pages. That is the primary reason. So let's import sidebar. Okay, great. So now we have our sidebar. Now let's make sure we are getting the data. So I'll console.log notes. Now, because this is a server component, you won't see this log in the browser. You will see it in the terminal instead. So as soon as I hit save, you will see the notes in the terminal. Oh, 1 second. So I need to call this get data first. I made a mistake here as well. I forgot to call this function. Now, as soon as I hit save, as you can see, we are getting all our data in the terminal. Now this is the primary way to know that this is a server component, because our console.log is running in the terminal, not in the browser. I can show you the browser console as well. There you see there's nothing in here. If it's a client component, then you'll see the console.log in the browser console. Okay, let's move forward. Now the next thing that we want to do is count how many tags are there. So I'll create an object. We want to count how many nodes are there that belongs to like particular category. So I'll create, and then I want to loop through all the nodes, and then each node has a tag. So what I'll do is I'll do node.tags for each, and now in here I want to check if that tag exists in the node with category count object. If it does, then I'll simply just increment it. So I'll copy this, else I'll add it and set that value equals to 1. Okay, great. And now for the return, what we want to do is, let's get rid of this first, add a tag called aside, and then inside that I'll add UL, and then I want to loop through all the object keys. So what I'll do is object dot keys, and here I'll do map, and then I'll have node index, and from that map I want to return li. Let's give this a key of index. Okay, now I want all these LIs to have a link, and then whenever that link is clicked, we'll go to that particular node category page. So let's import link here as well, and then here we want to show the count. Let me rename this to tag, because this is a tag and not a note. Okay, and we need to add href as well. Hit save, and there you go. You can see that we have one node currently, and that's why we are showing it here. That belongs to personal category. So if I go here, let me go to PocketBase collection, and we have one node that belongs to personal. Now if I create another record, so I can just like duplicate this, give it another tag, so school maybe, and hit create. Now if I come to our app and hit refresh, now this is one of the problems that I was telling you about caching around Next.js. It's not really a problem, but a functionality. Next.js by default will cache all your API calls. So you want to specify to Next.js when you do not want it to cache the response. And you can do that passing second argument to fetch cache to no cache. Okay, now as soon as I hit save, now every time I add a note, instead of using the cache response, Next.js will go to the server and get the data. You don't have to do it for every kind of app, but if your app data updates frequently, you might want to adapt this kind of caching strategy. Okay, great. So now we are getting all our categories, and we can also go to the category landing page. We have not created that page, so we'll get that error. We'll do that soon. Let's style our sidebar a little bit now. So to the aside tag, I'll add classes. I want it to be full screen, so great. Okay, awesome. It's expanding throughout the screen, so we'll figure that out later. Now for the LIs, what we want to do is add some vertical padding as well. Let's add border, and I want it to be capitalize. Okay, great. Now let's add width to our sidebar so it does not expand all the way on the screen. So I'll go to my styles, and in the global CSS, I'll just say aside width to 200 pixels. Okay, great. So this is what our sidebar looks like now. Awesome. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to show all our nodes here. Actually, before that, let's work on adding a note page. So for that, what we want to do is we want to create a new route now. So let's go ahead and do that. Inside our app directory, I will create a new folder called add. Now this is how the routing works in NextJS 13. Let's say if I want to add a new route called add, what I'll have to do is I'll have to go create a new folder called add under app, and then inside that folder I'll create a file called page.js. Now this page.js will basically map to this add. Now we are not exporting anything, that's why we are getting this error. So let's go ahead and add something to that page. Okay, there you go. Now we have our page running. Now the next thing that we want to do is let's add content to this page. So I'll give it h1 add note. Great. Let's add some padding as well. I'll add the padding on the container because later we'll add form and we want some padding on that around that as well. So I can eliminate that by just adding padding to the container. Okay, great. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to create a form component. Now this is where the interesting stuff comes in. Now if you think about it, this is a server component. This add is a server component. So we cannot import use state, use effect, like we cannot do any of that state stuff here. Now if you think about it, now server components, think of server components are like dumb components. There is no interactivity, there's no functionality. All you can do is fetch data from the server and like display it. It has its own benefits. But now we need to create a form, and form will require use state, use effect, all those React hooks. So what we want to do is we want to create a new component, but turn that component into a client component. So let's go ahead and do that. So inside components, I'll create a new file called noteform.js. Let's first import this into here and add it. Now this is your server component still. Now in order to turn this into a client component, we will have to add directive called use client, and this is it. This is a client component now. Now if let me show you that, if I open console, you will see test123 in the browser. That proves that this is a client component. Let me get rid of this directive and I will see test123 in the server. I can clear the console and just hit refresh. There you go. You are seeing test123 in the server, in the terminal now. So that means now this is a server component. So this is how you can turn a server component into a client component by using this use client directive. Okay, great. Now in this component, you have all your typical React stuff available. You have your use state, use effect, all the hooks, everything is available in client components. So now in client components, what we'll do first is we'll import our use state and use effect as well. Let me clear this console. Now let's add a state. This will be an object that will create title, description, tag, and done. Done will be a boolean. Okay, cool. So now let's go ahead and add our form. And remember, we'll use the same component for editing the note as well, but we will add that functionality later. Okay, so let's add our first input. Let me turn on word break. Okay, this is much better. Okay, and then we will add some styling. So class name, first of all, border, some padding. Great. Want it to be rounded, small, width full. Okay, great. Now this goes all the way on the screen. So let's add some width to the parent and some styling. So we'll do flex call width to 96. Okay, great. Now let's add a handler as well. So we'll do on change set note. Okay, let's test it. Great. Okay, now what we want to do is we'll just copy this input. Actually, we'll use text area for description. Let me just copy all these values, paste it here, change the value to description. Let's add some margin. Cool. So we have our title and our description now. Third field that we want to add is all our tags. So now on the client side, I'll create a const and add tags here. So for now, personal, home, shopping, and school. Great. Now what we'll do is we'll loop through those tags. So let's add a div. Okay, and now we want to check if the tag is active or not active. We can do that using is active, and if the state tags include the tag that we're looping through, includes tag. Great. Now we'll return span. Let's first give it a key and then tag. Great, let's add some styling to it. Now styling for this is a bit different. So what we want to do is, if the tag is active, we'll add 900 and text white. Cool. Else we'll add text as black. And then for the other classes, we'll do margin bottom to 2. We'll add a border and we'll have cursor to pointer. And we'll also do padding, add some rounded corners, margin right. Great. Okay, now we want to add a click functionality on these tags. So whenever it's clicked, we need to select that particular tag. So what I'll do is I'll do on click set note. If this is active, then we want to remove it. So we'll do okay, great. Else we'll just add it, not here. Great. Let's test this. Great, so this is working as expected. Now let's add our boolean. So let's not add our boolean. So by default, when you're adding a note, we'll set the done status to false, and you will be able to set it to true later on the home page or any individual category pages. Okay, now we'll add a button called create. Let's add some styling to that button. Okay, awesome. And on click of this button, we'll run this function. I still have to create this function, handle note. So now let's create that function. Now let's first turn this function into a async. Let's copy this. Okay, and to the second argument, we'll pass method as post body to and our note. And then we will also pass headers at what kind of content we are sending to the server. So it'll be content type to application/JSON. And I don't want to add too much error handling on it. If you do want to add it, you can go ahead and wrap this in like try catch. But what I'll do is, once this is successful, we'll just set our node to the initial state. Okay, and then we want to redirect the user back to like home page. So in order to redirect the user, let's first import use router hook from navigation, next navigation. So we'll do import use router from next/navigation. Okay, let's initialize the use router hook. Okay, and then we'll just redirect the user using router.push to home page. Okay, cool. So that was a lot of code, but let's see now if this is working as expected or not. So we'll do test note 3 personal, and let's open the network tab. Okay, awesome. So as you can see, our node got created. Let's try adding another node now and give this school. Oh, we have a school already, so home. Okay, now you see home as well because we have a node that belongs to that category. Great. So now what we want to do next is, and remember, like in future we'll be utilizing the same form for editing the note as well, but we'll come back to that later. So let's go to home page. Now what we want to do is we want to display all our notes on the home page and then on category pages based on the category. So let's go ahead and do that now. So let's go to home page. So this is our home page, and then so now I'll be creating a component called notes container and also a component called note. So let's first work on notes container. Okay, so here in notes container, this will be a server components as well. This should just fetch all our notes and then display them on the screen. That's all this component should do. So we'll do the similar thing, get data. Let me hide the sidebar first. Get data, it'll be an asynchronous function, and then we'll do data is equal to wait fetch. Now here, so PocketBase has ability where you can pass filters, and then based on those filters you can fetch the collection data. So for our collection, what I'll do is I'll add a filter by tag And then what I'll do inside here is I'll do type or just an empty string. So if the type is there, so for example we want to only fetch the nodes that belong to personal category, we can set the type. Otherwise, if we just set empty string, we'll get all the nodes back. So let's do that, and then here we'll just do type. Okay, great. And then the next thing that we want to do is we want to turn that into JSON. So we'll do await and then return the response. Great. Now here for the nodes container, let's do props and we'll do type. Actually, we can just destructure it here. So I'll do type and then we'll do nodes is equal to await get data type. Great. And then what we want to do is let's first initialize the node. So this will basically contain like title, description, done, and tags. Great. Let's import that. Will work on the node component later. Let's just first import it. And then what we want to do next is we want to loop through all the nodes and we just want to return node, and then we'll just pass all the node data like this, and also let's add a key so React can identify this. Okay, great. So now what we want to do is we just want to first console log the props here. So instead of doing that, let's just set up this. Instead of doing that, we'll just set up our node component. So I'll do h2 title. Okay, so for some reason title is not getting displayed. Oh, because we are not calling nodes container here. So let's call nodes container on our home page. Okay, cool. There you go. These are all our nodes title. So let's add some styling here first so we can see sidebar and nodes together. So what I'll do here is add class name grid calls 3 width to full, and then let's add some grid gap of 4, padding of 4. These are all Tailwind classes. That's why I love Tailwind, because it just makes it so much easier. And at page level, let's add class called flex and width to full. Okay, great. So now we are seeing all our title and the sidebar as well. So the next thing that we want to do is let's go ahead and add our description. So we'll do description. Okay, great. We are seeing description now. Let's add a bit of styling here. So we'll do class name background is amber 200. We want to add some padding. Okay, great. We are getting there. Round it to small. Okay, awesome. Let's add some styling to h2. So we want the font to be bold, text to be bigger. Let's change the color as well. And now here, if the done is true, that means if the node is marked as done, we want to add line through. Okay, great. And we'll do the same thing for description as well. So let's add class name, and then if it's done, then add line through. Okay, great. So this is done. Now let's display our tags as well. So what we'll do is tags.map, and then we have a tag. Let's also get the index, and then we want to return span tag, and then let's also add a key. Great. So now let's add some styling to the tags. Okay, great, perfect. So this is basically all our nodes. Now we have to add a Crud operations now, where user will be able to do checkbox and they'll be able to do edit the task or delete the task. Now that will require some interactivity. So let's go ahead and add a new client component called crud.js. Okay, great. Let's just first import this component in our node. So I'll do crud and then just drop it here. And to crud we want to pass a prop of done and ID, because inside crud we'll also have a delete button and edit button. For that we will need ID. but we are not getting ID as a prop, so let's also do that. Now let's work on the Crud component. Now Crud component will contain a checkbox that will be responsible for marking a note as done or not, and then it'll also have the edit and delete button. So let's start working on that. So first what we'll do is we'll add a edit button. So let's create another div inside and add a input type is equal to checkbox, and then we are getting the prop of done and ID. So the value of this will be done. Okay, and also let's add a span here saying done. Add some margin to the span, and let's also add an on change handler. Now this is one of the reasons why now you'll see as soon as I add on change, I'll start getting an error, because on change can only be attached to client components, and for obvious reasons, because on change is attached to DOM, right? And there's no DOM on the server. That's why we'll get an error as soon as I save it. There you go. I'm getting an error because if you need interactivity, consider converting part of this to a client component. So NextJS is clearly telling you that on change is for interactivity, and consider converting your component to client. So let's do that. Okay, great. Now if you think about this whole tile is a server component, but this specific part is a client component. Now this is the power of NextJS 13. You can convert server and client components together. So what we want to do is let's do handle done, and now create a function here called handle done. It'll be an asynchronous function, and what this function will do is basically update our note in the collection. So let's do that. Let's copy this URL and append the ID, and then as a second argument we will pass headers as what we are passing as content. So it'll be content type to application JSON, and then method will be patch. Now the difference between patch and put is put will replace the whole note. For example, it'll replace the title, description, tags, everything. But patch, what we will do is it will only replace that one specific field that we will pass as a body. So for example, in this scenario, I'll do body to JSON dot stringify, and we only want to replace done as whatever the opposite. So if it's true, we'll send false. If it's false, we'll send true. And then after that, what we want to do is we want to update the page. So this view gets updated because this is getting rendered on the server side. So for that, what we will do is we will require path name, and we'll get that using a hook from NextJS called use path name. Let's also import use router because we'll need that at some point. So what we will do here is we'll do path name and call the hook. Okay, and then once this is done, I am not going to add any error checking, but if you want, you can do so. So what I'll do is router dot push path name. Great. So now if we have done everything correctly, this should work. Let's try it out. Let me clear this. Okay, cool. So it is working as expected. If I uncheck this, as you can see, we are updating the view. Okay, awesome. So we got that working. Now let's add our edit and delete button. So right below this div, let's add another div, and in that div we will add a link. That link is basically for edit. Now we have to import that link from next link, and then href value will be edit slash edit, and then instead of slash we'll just add query param is equal to ID. We don't have this edit page yet, but we'll work on that soon. Okay, so we have the edit button now, and then we want to add a span so we can differentiate like edit and delete. For the button, let's add delete. Okay, so let's add some styling to it. So we'll do class flex and justify between. Okay, great. And we want items to be centered. Okay, now on the bigger screen, this should go side by side. Great, that's what we want. Now we'll come back to the edit, but we can work on the delete right now. So what I'll do is on click, I'll add a function called handle delete. Now for delete, we basically want to copy this and then replace this with delete and get rid of the headers and the body. We want to do the similar push, so let's do that as well. Okay, now I have added the delete functionality. Let's test it out. So if I hit delete, it should delete the note. Okay, awesome. So as you can see, our note is gone. And if you pay attention to this, our sidebar is also getting updated in real time. So if I delete this note, this personal should go away from the sidebar. There you go. As you can see, our delete is working as expected now. Awesome. So let's move forward and work on the edit part now. Now, purpose of this tutorial is not to actually show you like how this to-do list works. Like, it's super simple to build Crud to-do list. The purpose is to basically show you the difference between like a server component and a client component. And I hope you are getting that understanding of like when will you need a server and when we need a client components. Like in this case, we needed interactivity, we needed on change handlers, we need whenever the state is needed, we'll have to turn the component into client components. So try to keep your components like as small as possible. So for example, instead of creating this one whole tile as one component, I've split this into two. So this is a server component and then these three functions are like client components. So now let's go ahead and work on the edit part. If I click on the edit right now, you'll see that it's giving an error because we have not created that page. So let's go ahead and create that page. Okay, so now we want to create the edit page. It'll be very similar to the add page that we created. So we'll go ahead and under app folder, we'll create a new folder called edit. And in that edit folder, we'll create page.js. Now this page will be very similar to add page. So I'll just copy paste what we have in the add page and change this to edit. Great. So now we have edit note here. Now what we want to do is we want to modify our note form component to check for the URL ID. So let's go ahead and do that. So we can do that using use search params hook that NextJS provides. So in the note form component, we'll import search params and then we'll call that hook. Search params dot get ID. Great. Now we want to check if the ID is there, then we will simply update the note instead of adding it. So let's first manipulate this button. So what we'll do is if the ID is there, then we'll do update, else we'll do create note. Okay, so we have getting update note now. And what we also want to do is we want to get all the information of the note with this ID and then pre-fill the form fields. So let's do that. So outside this note form component, I'll create a function called get data and let's pass this ID. This will be a asynchronous function and then we'll use this function to basically get that one note. So what I'll do here is const data is equal to await fetch. Let me copy this URL again and then append ID to the URL. Next we'll pretty much do the same thing. So const response is equal to await data.json and then we'll return the response. Great. So now let's move forward, and in our note form component, what we want to do is we want to add now use effect hook and we'll pass ID as a param. And if the ID is present, then we will do, sorry, instead of get date, let's do get note because we are getting single note. So we'll do get note, we'll pass ID, and then now we'll use promise because I don't want to add asynchronous function to use effect. So I'll do then we'll get the data and then we'll set note title to data.title. Let's first make sure it's working. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to add description to data.description. We are getting this error, by the way, because here we are setting the new object and that does not include tags. So that's why we are getting that error. So let's just first add all the data correctly. Okay, cool. So now we are getting all the data pre-filled for that note. Awesome. So now what we want to do next is whenever this button is clicked, we want to update the node. So let's modify our handle node function. So now instead of post, let's do this. If ID is there, then we'll do patch, else we'll do post. Great. And then also let's append ID to the records. So what we'll do is we'll do ID or just like an empty string. Now that's about it. This should work now. So let's do not scroll, I want to add school, and we'll try updating the node. Okay, so our node is now getting updated as well. That is great. Let's add another tag. So this has school, let's also add like personal. There you go. Now this has school and personal is also showing up in the sidebar, which is great. That's what we wanted. Okay, cool. So now the next thing that we want to do is we want to create category pages. So if I click on like school, you'll see it goes to school, but there is no page for that. That's why we get that error. So let's go ahead and now add category pages. And this is also a new concept that you'll learn now, is like how to create dynamic pages. Because if you see, we have school, and then we have like personal, and then we have like home, and we do not want to create multiple pages because there can be infinite number of tags, right? So we'll create a dynamic route now. And the way to create dynamic route in NextJS is pretty simple. So you'll create a folder and wrap your folder name inside square brackets. This is basically telling NextJS that this is a dynamic route. We'll add a file called page.js, and this page will be similar to like home page. So I'll just like copy this for now. Okay, great. And now if you remember, we pass nodes container component a type prop. That's where now it will come handy. We want to only show the nodes that belong to that specific type. Now if you're wondering where this type will come from, NextJS injects params prop into the pages. So if there is a dynamic URL like school, in this case it'll be under params prop, and it will be of same name. So for example, here we have named as type, that's why I'm using type here. If I change the name to ID, I'll have to change the name here as well to ID. Okay, great. So now you just saw this is working as expected. We are on school and we are only seeing nodes that belong to school. If I switch to personal, we'll see personal. If I switch to home, we'll see home. And you can also mark it as done here. Okay, so this is not working as expected. Okay, there is some issue, so let's solve that. So what happens is, if I go to home and then if I deselect this, this is not getting selected. And this is one of those problems with caching. Again, it's not a problem, it's a functionality of NextJS, but sometimes it can be an issue because NextJS has basically cached this response. That's why our node is not getting updated. So let's go ahead and fix that. So in the nodes container where we are getting our data, to the fetch we'll pass a second argument. And we'll simply say cache to no cache. Okay, great. Now when we refresh and we hit this, it'll get updated in the real time. We can click on to do and you'll see it is marked as done. And one more thing that we want to do is we want to stop the link from prefetching. Let me show you what I mean. So if you go to sidebar, now wherever you see this link component, what NextJS basically doing behind the scenes is it will go ahead and prefetch this page in advance. We don't want to do that. So we'll do prefetch is equal to false, not phase. Okay, so now if I hit done here and go to home page, there is some issue here. So I figured out the problem is in the header component. So this is the problem. So what this link is doing is basically prefetching this page. So for example, let's say if we landed on this page, it'll cache this page. And then if I mark this as done, right, keep a copy of this page. So if I go to home now, and even if I mark this as undone and go to, it'll still show you that page because it has cached it. So we don't want to do that. Let's go ahead and prefetch is equal to false. Great. Now if I mark it as done and go to home, okay, great. Now this is working as expected. So now you just saw an example of how you have to keep these things in mind. Prefetching on the link component, caching strategies, and all that you have to keep in mind when you're building apps using NextJS 13 or any prior versions as well. you have to keep the caching strategy in mind. Like in this example, we want our sidebar to be updated frequently. We want the nodes to be updated frequently. That's why we have to set the cache to no store, no cache. But if you have like a blog that does not update frequently, you can use the caching strategy. So let's just test our app one more time. If I mark this as done and go to home, and this is marked as done here as well. Now I'll undone it and then go here. Okay, awesome. Let's try deleting task. So if I delete this, okay, great. Let's try editing. So I'll select home. Okay, great. So everything is working as expected. Now this is a quick tutorial on Next.js 13. I hope you learned about server components, client components, like caching strategies, how to add dynamic routes, how to add like new routes in Next.js 13. I'll post code. I'll also be posting code of this app on GitHub. I'll post a link to that in the description below. So make sure to check that out and subscribe to the channel for more such videos. I'll keep posting more content on Next.js 13. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.